Hey y'all, it is time for the top 10 books of 2020, so let's go. So in 2020, I read 58 books, which was a lot more than I thought I was going to be able to do. I started out the year with the goal of reading 24. I surpassed that in June. My next goal, I went ahead and bumped it up because I wasn't even close to the end of the year. So I bumped it up to 36. And once I hit 36, I just left it and ended up with 58 books for 2020. So I want to go over my top 10. So maybe honorable mentions might be cheating just a little bit. I couldn't not discuss these two, but they didn't quite make it into my top 10. So I wanted to have two honorable mentions. So the first honorable mention is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. It's an honorable mention because I really did love this book. However, it's kind of weird to say that because this book was so depressing and I cried at least 4 times that I know of. Like, I remember tearing up many more times than that, and it's just one of those books where I'm always hesitant to suggest people read it because you're not going to have a good time reading this book. You're not going to be happy, you're going to be sad, and then when you feel like it can't get worse, it does get worse. And I don't know. I know now that I've had some distance with this book, I feel like that there are some problems with it. I do know that toward the end it kind of gets a little bit repetitive, but I just feel like it has so much discussion around friendships and forgiveness, as well as, you know, mental health and enabling mental health as well. I just love this book, so I couldn't leave it off my list, but I also just felt weird putting it on because I was so miserable reading it. But it was worth my time, and it was just really good. So my second honorable mention is actually The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. It's the second book in the Wheel of Time series. I really loved this book. It was better to me than the first one, but it just wasn't as great as some of these other books that I'm going to get into. However, I can just tell we're really kind of jumping off into what is going to be an epic story. And I wanted to at least mention this because I really did enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to The Dragon Reborn, and I think The Shadow Rising is the 4th book. I hear that the series just really is pushed forward after the 2nd and 3rd books. So I want to give this, you know, a good shout out like it deserves, even if it didn't quite make the top 10. Okay, so starting with number 10 is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This is a little novella that kind of took me by surprise. As soon as I heard the premise, I knew I wanted to read it. And it's about these mermaids, for lack of a better term. I don't think they're legitimately mermaids, but they are mermaid type creatures, and they are the descendants of African slave women who were pregnant, and they were thrown overboard of the slaver ships and left to die. So that premise alone just had so much potential and, I don't know, great things to say. So I picked up this novella and it was amazing. I really loved the creativity of it, just the depth of the story, even though it's super short. I loved it. It really talks about trauma of people as a whole, as a group, and running away from trauma and just having to bear these burdens, and, you know, sometimes of things that are greater than yourself. I really don't know what to say without spoiling too much as well. That's kind of the difficulty with novellas, but just like I said, there's just a lot of discussion that can be made about this book. And I know I have a review of it as well that I'll link down in the description, but it was just an amazing book, and I honestly feel like it would do well as a full-length novel. I would have loved just a little bit more development because it was just such a great idea, such a great, I don't know, discussion around the trauma of people, you know, as a group, and how groups are treated and what we do to each other as humans. It was a great book. Definitely top 10 easy for this year. Number 9 was hyped just to the max this year, and as I was reading it, I absolutely loved this book, and I put it at number 9. However, after having some distance, I'm honestly not sure how I feel about it, but that book is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Now, when I say that I don't know how I feel about it, it's just the fact that when I go back and think about it, it's actually kind of boring. It's a little boring, and I didn't feel that way when I was reading it. And I was discussing it with some people, and several people actually didn't like it. Now, Books on Peak, she did like it. Her and I were talking about it a little bit. I'll link her channel down below. But I think her and I were the only people that really enjoyed it that I remember talking to. A lot of people just felt like it was a little boring. The story didn't really pick up until halfway through, which I can definitely understand. And I do also see the repetition that some people were complaining about. And I don't know if it's just because this was so different than anything else that I've read, and you'll see from my list of top 10, this is different than anything else that I've read this year. So I kind of liked the purple prose. It wasn't overly done in my opinion, but it was definitely, you know, more flowery than what I'm used to reading or what I have read recently. And I kind of liked that change of pace. It was definitely a slow change of pace. This is a character-based book, not a plot-based book. And that doesn't bother me. I am more of a character person. However, a lot of people aren't, and it just, I can see how some people would feel that this is boring. I wasn't really bored until I started talking about it to other people, and then I kind of realized there's not much really to talk about. But you all know me, my favorite book is The 13th Tale, arguably probably one of the most boring books ever, and I still love it. I still love it. So still number 9, and I don't know if that'll change the more I think about it, but I'm gonna leave it at number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames, and no one is surprised. This is well loved by so many people because it is just pretty fast paced, it's funny, it's lighthearted, it's pretty much a standalone. It is part of a series, but it doesn't continue on as like an epic fantasy, so it can kind of be a standalone. This book was a blast. It had a lot of D&D references. I've been told it has a lot of rock music references. I didn't get any of those except for the fact that they're a band. I didn't get any of those references, and I still loved it. You don't have to get the references to enjoy this book. There was a Portal reference. Love it. Anyway, it's just super fun, super lighthearted, and I cannot wait for Bloody Rose. I'm going to be getting into it in the next couple months, so stay tuned for that. Number 7 is Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the first book in the Rhaeria Revelations. I think I'm just going to say I loved this book for every single book, but I loved this book. It was really funny. It is also technically an epic fantasy. It does have 2 other pretty big novels to go with it as part of this trilogy. And the world is great, and it's one of those things where, although it feels very large, there's a lot of political intrigue, it's not that difficult to follow, and the humor of Hadrian and Royce is just excellent. I love this duo, and I think that's what really kind of pulls you through, is you just love these characters and everything that they go through. But I am going to be getting into the next 2 books here, probably the first 6 months of 2021, because I'm focusing on finishing these series, and this is one of them. But by far, hilarious. Coming in at number 6, I just put The Greatcoats as a whole. This was a quartet by Sebastian de Castell. I started this as a read-along with Mike's book reviews, and I wasn't planning on reading this last year, but this is one of the few series. I think I only did two or three series altogether, like started and finished it in 2020, and this is one of them. I finished the 4th one in December, just in time to get under that 2020 wrap-up there, so I read all 4 of these. They are excellent. Everybody harkens it to The Three Musketeers. I've never read The Three Musketeers, but the 3 characters, they're really close together. They are humorous, and their friendship just stands the test of time. They keep each other in check, and the humor throughout all 4 of these books is great. However, there are some pretty dark things that happen in these books, and there's a scene in this first book that all of us talk about, but we never talk about because we all just hate it. Some people may not be able to move past this, and I completely understand that, but it's really not that big of a part in the book. It's just kind of weird that it happened, but overall I still put this in my top 10 because I really did like the story. You kind of have to buy into the cheesiness, but just absolutely great. Coming in at number 5 is Malice by John Gwynne. I love this book. It is a traditional type fantasy, but I loved it. It has a lot of characters, but The author, John Gwynne, he was really good at, when you kind of go to another point of view, if he brings up a name, he kind of gives you like a little title or just a small 3 to 4 word description of who that person was, and that really helped me because sometimes with these bigger epic stories, it can be difficult to keep up with the cast of characters. And so I really enjoyed how he'd say the name and then king of wherever, and you know, just move on. So it's like, even if you don't need those reminders, they're not that intrusive, but if you do, they're right there and it's super quick and easy. I just loved this story and just the ease that you go through with it. I'm gonna be reading Valor hopefully in January. That may carry over into February, but I can't wait to continue this series. Coming in at number 4 is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I feel like this book really changed fundamentally how I view grief in of itself and my own grief, how I have handled that for all these years, how I've carried it throughout all these years, and it's made me think about the effect of my grief on the people around me. So this book wasn't scary for the reasons that it's typically to be thought of as scary. I can't talk too much about it without getting really teary-eyed, so we're just going to say that this was very moving and just so much deeper than what the synopsis about this pet cemetery leads you to believe. It was excellently written, definitely one of my favorites of Stephen King, and number 4 of my 2020 reads. Coming in at number 3 is Warbreaker. I really liked this breath of fresh air from Brandon Sanderson. I made myself finish Mistborn Era 2 before I read this, and I really needed this pick-me-up after Era 2. I'll just put it that way. But it was bright and colorful and fun. It had some more humor in it that I really liked. The twists, of course, Brandon Sanderson really got me a couple times, and I don't know, I really liked this book, and I know it's supposed to kind of be a standalone, but there is going to be a sequel several years down the road, and I look forward to it. Coming in at number 2 is Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This book took me completely by surprise. I'd heard great things about it all year, and finally in the fall I was able to read this. It was just so powerful and great. I loved the action scenes, and I know some people felt like it was a bit repetitive, and I can understand what they're saying about the repetition of some of the training scenes, but I don't know, I feel like it really built up Tao as a character, and I love Tao. I'll talk about Tao in my top characters, I guarantee it. So I'm sure he's going to be in there when I sit down and think about it. He's just a great character, and I love the uniqueness of this story, the setting, the magic. The magic is what is just great about this story. I loved the magic. So here it is, the number 1 spot. I actually put 3 books in one for this spot because it's technically the entire Mistborn Era 1. I know that some of these twists may be old hat to some of you who've read a lot of fantasy, but this was one of the first series of me really, once I got back into reading fantasy, this took me by surprise. The world was great. Some of these cliffhangers that Brandon Sanderson would leave you on, and then these things that he would just bring in from the first book and he'd wrap them up in the third. Even when you didn't feel like you needed it to be wrapped up, he just brought out this just nugget of gold and just made it that much better when you finish up the series. It was absolutely astounding for me. It was great. So all 3 of these books I kind of lumped together because I feel like as a trilogy they make the cohesive story that I enjoyed so much. Number 1 read for 2020 was definitely Mistborn Era 1. And I look forward to starting his Stormlight Archive in 2021. Those were my top 10 books of 2020. Here in the next couple days, I'll have my bottom 10 books of 2020, as well as the books that I ended up DNFing and pausing. So stay on the lookout for those. Go ahead and leave me a comment if some of these were your top 10, or if they were in your bottom 10, let me know why, because I want to know why you hated them whenever I love them. I love discussions like that because people can really read the same book and have a completely different experience. Like I said, I have a feeling The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is going to be one of those books. So be on the lookout for my next few videos. Y'all are as good as gold. Y'all take care. Bye.